to kind of assuage the fear of the unknown and that type of thing.
Yes. Well, and also, even if you argue that religion itself is adaptive in some way, even adaptive traits can become maladaptive if conditions change. And that sort of brings us up to, I guess, one of the questions that gets asked a lot is religion actually necessary for some people? Do some people require religion? And when people ask this question, they're usually implying a couple of things, that people need a God to keep them from committing bad acts, or that they need a God to provide comfort because the truth is just too much to bear.
Right.
And I would say that this may be an example of why religion is so maladaptive today. Because if you look, I pulled this up, there's a Gallup poll that looked, this was actually just released on the 31st of August. And it was talking about religiosity in the world's poorest nations, okay? And number one on the list is Bangladesh. 99% of the people there are religious, okay? And then it's got, another list. You can actually go to the Gallup site and look this up. But these are some of the poorest nations in the world: Yemen, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Somaliland, Burundi, and they're just. I think that what's happening in these countries is that reliance on religion as a comfort or as a source of enlightenment or whatever is actually preventing them from facing the truth and confronting their own problems and ultimately solving their problems. So far from providing this source of comfort, this is actually exacerbating their situation. And that's why I am actually an anti-theist in addition to being an atheist, because
Sure.
I think religion is doing grave harm to people in poor nations. Which also brings up an interesting question, because we've cited the study that shows that religious belief is inversely proportional to like social ills.
Yeah.
So the
societal health.
Societal health.
If it's
yeah.
inverse.
Yeah. So the healthier the society, the lower the belief in religion. So the question is it religious belief that drives societal health, or is the increase in societal health the thing that drives down religion?
Yeah.
So.
And it's one of those things that we may not be able to find out, or at least we're not going to find out anytime soon. And it goes for the question of whether or not religion has evolutionary benefits.
Yeah.
Well, clearly, you can find benefits in all kinds of beliefs, whether they're
Right.
true or not. And we talked about it a little bit last week. I mentioned the idea that, for example, your loved one has moved on is a good way to it's an effective way, I won't say good, effective way of easing guilt and a sense of loss.
Right.
The question that we need to ask is, are we better off by eliminating this crutch surrounding death and actually educate people about life and death and the practical reality, such that when it occurs, the guilt is already lessened, that or the loss and pain and mourning is already lessened, because they have a measured understanding of what's actually happening. And we've kind of taken the fear out at the knees on that method. Now, which method actually works better, I have no idea. And my position is that I actually care enough about the truth that I'm not interested in comfortable delusions. If people happen to believe religious claims or supernatural claims or whatever claim, simply because it makes them feel good, that's certainly their prerogative. It's not anything I would do. It's something that I don't think is necessarily a good idea. And I don't even know how you can have a discussion about it. If somebody says, we've talked before about, Martin Gardner, a great skeptic who's also a theist, and he basically said that he didn't apply skepticism to his theistic beliefs. They were simply a way of eliminating despair, and that they, were not rationally supported. Well, okay, I can't say anything to that other than that's not what I'd do, and I don't recommend it. I care more about what's true than whether or not it's, makes you feel funny.
Well, what's interesting is that I just read a research paper that talked about children, very young children, and the difference in their beliefs about what happens after you die. And it turns out that extremely young children are much less likely to believe that some part of their consciousness survives death than older children. So what this says is that we're actually teaching children to believe in an afterlife. They don't come, into the world believing that there's an afterlife or that their consciousness in some way survives their physical death. And so I think that in some ways we are actually infecting them with this fear.
Yeah.
And causing them to cling to this.
Which might be a good time to go back to Marius, who called in before the show real quick. You there, Marius?
I'm here, y'all.
Yeah, can we turn that up again for him, and then we'll turn it back down afterwards?
Sorry, again?
Yeah, we can barely hear you.
Okay, there's nothing much I can do. Can you hear me now?
Well, if it's not going to be going out over the stream where they can hear him, then Marius, I apologize. We're just going to have to go ahead and drop this, and we'll talk about the subject off the air because the volume on your phone's not even enough to get out to the stream. So I apologize for that. He had called in before the show, and we cranked up the volume in the studio, which won't affect what's going to the feed, to talk about kids and atheism and how you deal with raising kids and broaching the subject. I don't know, you didn't get to chime in much before the show, so.
Yeah, and I guess Marius has a 7-year-old daughter. He's a closet atheist, and he's wondering how he can, I guess, let her know in some way she doesn't have to believe in a God. And so I think that one of the things that I've done with my son, who's almost 5, is I've started introducing him to the concept of like the Greek and Roman myths, because I think the more he learns about other people's views on gods and religion, the less likely he is to accept blindly anyone else's views on this. So I think that that's a good way of inoculating him against just blindly following a religious belief. And then, of course, as Matt mentioned, Russell has this game that he plays with his son that he introduced to him very young, and it's real or pretend. And you pick something and you ask him if it's real or pretend, and he gets to decide on his own and provide his own justification for his answer. And I think things like that are really good ways of getting kids to think about what they believe and why they believe them. And that's ultimately what we want them to do. So
the big thing is that while we are actively in opposition to religion on the whole, it's hey, there was a weird camera shot. We don't believe it. We see no reason why anybody else should believe it. And in many cases, if not most or nearly all cases, we see a great deal of harm, and our concern is with whether or not things are true. So the suggestion that I made was the one I always make, which is to teach your kids how to think instead of what to think or what you think they should think. And that's good and it's pithy and everything else, but more importantly, I wasn't an atheist until I was well over 30. I was a skeptic long before then. I just didn't apply skepticism to my religious beliefs. There are plenty of people who are skeptics and theistic. I just don't happen to think that they're applying skepticism to their theism, and in some cases they're denying that it should, but that's a subject for another day. I tend to think that if you can foster a sense of curiosity and kind of go for the awe of discovery and exploration, of getting them to question everything and explore for the answers to those questions, and to be willing to say, I don't know, and none of us know, when we have no good answer, I think they'll end up fine, even if they're, religious for many, many years, or if they happen to be raised in unless they're being raised in some particularly damaging, cult that doesn't allow this sort of education to go on. I would hope that most of them are going to, find their way through to seeing reason and seeing the benefits of a rational worldview where we rely on the scientific method and evidence. But
yeah, I agree. I think that, like you said, even if they end up being theists themselves, what they will have is the ability to, at the very least, minimize the harm that those beliefs are likely to do. So they're unlikely to accept the claims of some religions that you can't take blood transfusions, or that you can't have vaccinations, or
You should pray instead of going to the hospital.
right, that you shouldn't use birth control, you know, that you should let God control your fertility.
And maybe you'll be able to, maybe they'll be convinced that they shouldn't be imposing their personal views on everybody else through legislation.
Yes.
We can only hope. Because those are my favorite theists.
Oh,
People
yeah.
like the Reverend Barry Lynn, who runs Americans United that we talked about earlier. He and I will disagree all day long on the whole God subject, all day. And we could have, you know, great rows over it. But we're in agreement on having a secular nation and enforcing and encouraging church-state separation. And those types of ideas you can foster relatively easily by exposing your kid to everything in the world. You know, don't keep them locked up in a little private school with a couple of friends, and they're in church all the time and they never see anything outside. I'm convinced, the 8 years that I spent in the Navy, that helped me understand that my view on the world at the time was incredibly myopic. And while it's been broadened, there's still a lot more to go. So.
Oh, did I tell you my recent discussion with my son regarding the Pledge of Allegiance?
No.
Yeah, because he was taught in school to say the Pledge of Allegiance with the under God part in it, and which he pronounces unaga, because he doesn't get the whole God concept. But whenever I say it, I omit that, and he, for the longest time, was really adamant that you must say it this way, because he's very literal at this age. Well, I finally convinced him the other day that it's not necessary, and that not everybody puts that in there. It wasn't in the original, and I don't say it that way. So he accepts that I say it different from what he's heard everyone else say it. And so it was really funny listening to him say the pledge the other day, because the last part of it, we've got the under God part settled, but now we're into the last part, which is with liberty and juices for all.
Cool.
Yeah, so.
I'm a fan. Juices for everybody. Yeah. I'm on board. We've got...